Julia Child once introduced the world to the Chicken Sisters, Miss Broiler, Miss Fryer, and Miss Roast, in her cheerful, familiar voice. But behind that famous charm was a woman full of secrets, passion, and an extraordinary life story that the world didn't see for decades. In 1958, she wrote a private letter to her sister that contained marriage advice so bold and shocking it stayed hidden for years. Julia called it her secret to a happy marriage, and when she quietly shared it with a well-known chef in the 1970s, they were completely stunned. Her private letters to her husband, Paul, revealed a Julia who was nothing like the polite TV host people knew. She wrote about love, temptation, and deep desires. The real Julia Child was outspoken, curious, funny, and unashamedly herself. Julia Carolyn McWilliams was born on August 15, 1912, in Pasadena, California. Her family was wealthy, and she grew up in a large craftsman-style house surrounded by gardens and sunshine. Her father, John McWilliams Jr., went to Princeton and worked in land management. Her mother, Carol Weston, came from an influential Massachusetts family and had inherited a fortune. Julia was the eldest of 3 children. Her brother John and her sister Dorothy completed the trio. Growing up, Julia never had to worry about chores. The family had servants who handled cooking and cleaning, so Julia never learned her way around a kitchen. She went to private schools, including Westridge and Polytechnic, where she dreamed of becoming a novelist rather than a cook. After graduating from Smith College in 1934, she had imagination and energy but no clear direction. Julia was always taller than most people. By her teens, she stood 6 feet 2 inches. That made her feel different and sometimes embarrassed. Classmates teased her and called her names like Giant or Beanstalk. The teasing hurt, but it also toughened her up. At Katharine Branson School, she channeled her energy into sports like basketball, tennis, and golf, where her height became an advantage. Humor helped her cope, too. At Smith College, Julia became known for her pranks. Once, she hit an alarm clock in the chapel organ, and it rang loudly in front of 500 students during a solemn event. Everyone laughed, but those moments also hit her insecurities. The teasing she endured in childhood would later give her the courage to laugh at herself on live television, even when things went wrong. Julia's views were different from her family's. Her parents were conservative Republicans, but she started questioning unfairness early on. At age 10, she asked her father why the black household staff were treated differently. He didn't like the question, but it opened her eyes to injustice. As she grew older, she became even more outspoken about politics and fairness. In the 1950s, when people were being accused of communism without proof, Julia spoke up for free speech and civil rights. In the 1980s, she warned about pollution, saying the Earth could end up like Venus, too hot to live on, if people didn't change their habits. In 1990, she criticized politicians who called themselves pro-life but ignored the needs of poor children. Julia wasn't afraid to say what she thought, even if it made her unpopular in her own family. The food Julia grew up with was boring. The servants boiled vegetables until they were mushy and served plain meat without seasoning. Julia often joked about her childhood meals, calling them mushy horrors. She didn't know it then, but those dull dinners would later drive her to change how America cooked. One day in 1925, she nearly gagged on soggy green beans. She never forgot how bad they tasted. That memory stayed buried until 1948, when she discovered French cuisine, full of flavor, texture, and richness. She later said that first French meal opened a door to another world. From then on, she believed food should be joyful and full of life. She hated powdered soups and diet meals, calling them immoral. Julia was mischievous and adventurous from childhood. At age 10, she and her siblings threw water balloons at people walking by from their family's trees. Once, she soaked 15 people in one afternoon. Her family found her antics a bit wild, but that playfulness never left her. At Smith College, she joined the Grass Cops Club, a group that jokingly enforced campus lawn rules, and she once helped steal furniture from a rival dorm. She loved to make people laugh, and though her grades were average, her bold personality would later help her take creative risks on television. After graduating, Julia moved to New York City in 1934 and worked as a copywriter at a furniture store, W&J Sloan, for $18 a week. She had a strong will and clashed with her boss about an ad she wrote. When she refused to change it, she was fired in 1937 for gross insubordination. At first, it was humiliating, but later she said it was a blessing. The job never suited her spirit anyway. Back home in Pasadena, Julia volunteered for the Red Cross. She organized relief efforts after floods and helped hundreds of victims. But her personal life wasn't going smoothly. She was rejected by several men, one of whom told her she was too tall and loud. Another said her laugh was too wild. Those painful experiences made her feel she might never find love. Around the same time, her father became sick, and she cared for him until his death in 1941. Julia had always wanted to be a writer, but she struggled to get published. She wrote stories about wealthy Californians and their scandals, but editors turned them down. She received more than 20 rejection letters and once burned a manuscript in frustration. Still, the experience helped her develop her writing style, which she would later use in her cookbooks. When World War II began, Julia wanted to help. She tried to join the Women's Army Corps and later the Navy Waves, but both rejected her for being too tall. Eventually, she joined the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, the secret organization that later became the CIA. Her first job was as a file clerk, but she quickly moved up. She worked with top-secret documents and even helped develop shark repellent for torpedoes. She handled thousands of files and learned to pay attention to detail, skills that would later help her write precise recipes. In 1944, Julia was sent to Ceylon, now Sri Lanka, and later to China. She organized secret files, decoded messages, and helped expose a spy ring that used poison tea. She also suffered from malaria and nearly died. But amidst the chaos of war, something beautiful happened. She met Paul Child. Paul was an artist, intellectual, and food lover. At first, they didn't like each other. He thought Julia was too emotional and messy, and she thought he was strange-looking. But after spending time together photographing elephants in the jungles of Sri Lanka, they grew close. By the time they were both stationed in China, they were deeply in love. Their romance was passionate and full of laughter. They wrote hundreds of letters, filled with poetry, jokes, and affection. In one, Paul called her "my lovely giantess." Julia, usually private, opened up completely to him. They married on September 1, 1946. The day before their wedding, their car spun off a wet road and flipped 3 times, leaving Julia bruised and bandaged. Still, she walked down the aisle smiling. Their honeymoon was a disaster. Julia tried to cook something fancy that made them both sick, but they laughed through it. In 1948, Paul was transferred to Paris for work, and Julia followed. There, everything changed. One night, she ate a simple French meal that transformed her view of food forever. She described it as an opening of the soul. She enrolled in Le Cordon Bleu cooking school, where she was the only woman in her class. The chefs made fun of her height and clumsiness, but Julia was determined. She practiced endlessly, cutting onions until her hands bled and learning how to deboine a duck in minutes. In 1951, Julia graduated and began teaching cooking with 2 friends, Simone Beck and Louisette Berthold. They started a small school in Julia's Paris kitchen, charging $10 per class. It wasn't easy. There were accidents, including a gas explosion that singed her eyebrows, but she kept going, laughing off every setback. Around the same time, the trio started writing a cookbook. It took them nearly 10 years to finish. Julia tested thousands of recipes, used hundreds of pounds of butter, and rewrote pages again and again. She wanted the recipes to be perfect for Americans who didn't know French cooking. Publishers kept rejecting the manuscript, saying it was too complicated or too French. Julia refused to simplify it. Finally, in 1961, after years of work and exhaustion, Mastering the Art of French Cooking was published, and it became an instant success. It sold over 100,000 copies in its first year. Julia became a celebrity overnight. Her first TV appearance came when she demonstrated cooking on a local Boston show. She accidentally flipped a pancake onto the counter, laughed, and said, "Remember, you're alone in the kitchen." Viewers adored her. That unfiltered authenticity made her one of America's most beloved television hosts. Her show, The French Chef, premiered in 1963 and ran for a decade. Millions of people watched her cook, laugh, and make mistakes without apology. She won an Emmy and a Peabody Award, proving that food television could be both educational and fun. But behind her success, she faced challenges. Her co-author Simone Beck felt overlooked and accused Julia of taking too much credit. Their friendship suffered, though Julia later admitted Simone deserved more recognition. In 1968, Julia faced another personal battle, breast cancer. She underwent surgery to remove her left breast and quietly recovered with Paul's love and humor helping her through. Julia continued to cook and inspire others. In 1989, she released The Way to Cook, a massive book with over 800 recipes. Some chefs criticized her for including tips on how to improve canned food, but she believed good cooking was about care, not status. She said, "If you treat every ingredient with respect, even canned peas can taste wonderful." Julia spoke openly about her love for butter and cream, rejecting modern diet trends. "The only time to eat diet food," she once joked, "is while waiting for the steak to cook." Her philosophy was simple: enjoy life, eat with joy, and don't fear food. Her marriage to Paul lasted nearly 5 decades and was full of playfulness. They sent cheeky Valentine's cards to friends, wrote love poems, and supported each other through everything. They couldn't have children, fertility treatments in the 1950s failed, but Julia often said her children were her recipes and her students. When Paul fell ill in the 1970s and later suffered strokes and heart attacks, Julia cared for him devotedly. She continued filming her shows, visiting him daily, and writing him letters filled with affection. After he died in 1994, she said her heart had lost its rhythm. Even in her 80s, Julia was still strong-willed and full of humor. She donated her house and famous kitchen to the Smithsonian, where it remains on display today. She kept cooking, writing, and laughing until the very end. Julia Child passed away peacefully in her sleep on August 13, 2004, just 2 days before her 92nd birthday. Her last meal was French onion soup, simple, comforting, and full of flavor, just like her life. She once wrote, "The pleasures of the table, and of life, are infinite." Julia didn't just teach America how to cook, she taught people to live fully, love deeply, and never be afraid to make a mess in pursuit of joy. Her story, from a tall, awkward girl in Pasadena to one of the most influential chefs in the world, is a reminder that it's never too late to find your passion, follow it fearlessly, and sprinkle a little butter along the way.